Hey friends, welcome to another edition of Big Al's Rockin' Podcast. As always, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe, like, and share. In this episode, I have esteemed veteran rock author Gillian Gaar, and she's going to talk to us today about the book Tom Petty, The Life and Music.
Well, it's great to be here.
It's good to have you back. You were here earlier this year, or maybe late last year, for the Queen book.
Oh, Queen, yes, that was this year. That was a big favorite of mine to do.
Yeah, that's a favorite book to look at.
Yeah, yeah.
But anyway, this book is an in-depth exploration of the band operating at the peak of their creative powers and launching them into superstardom.
Mm.
And there are five major sections in the book. So if you would like, could you give us a brief overview about each section?
You mean we're back with the Petty book now, right?
That is correct.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's all presented chronologically from when he's born to actually after his death. We have a couple entries after that. So I can't quite remember how they were all divided. I know the first section would have gone up to the big breakthrough with Damn the Torpedoes. And I think the second section ends with the arson on his house, which certainly was probably one of the most extraordinary and unfortunate things to happen to him. That crime's still unsolved. Uh, after the fire, he had thought that it was just, faulty wiring or something. But the investigators told him, no, this was deliberately set. This was arson. So that's a disconcerting thought, isn't it? That someone feels that about you, that they want to attack you in this way, and it's still an open case, never been solved. So so that's interesting. I know the final section, it would have ended, well, as I say, after his death. There were a few entries afterwards, I know, covering some of the box sets that had come out, and I think the last one is, and the song escapes me, but it was a song in his catalog that was used in one of the new video games they have out. Actually, it was just used in the trailer for the game. It was an immensely popular game. And it was, not one of his hits. It wasn't anything like American Girl or something like that. A sort of, a lesser known song, but it's used in the trailer for this popular game. And boom, it just shot up on the downloads and the Spotify views and all that, became one of his most popular tracks. So I know I ended that by saying, he's not here, but his legacy is, and it will continue. And obviously, that was a great example of how his songs, his music were being introduced to new generations, not just fans that already knew about him, but new listeners too.
Yeah. Were you approached to write this book, or did you have to pitch the idea to the publisher?
Well, this one I was approached to do. It's the same publisher that did the Queen book, and that one I pitched to them because huge Queen fan, and I love A Night at the Opera. They had this series of books on such and such album at 50, or I don't know if they've done other ones like at such and such album at 60 or something. So I was looking around which 50th anniversaries are coming up that I'd be interested in. And it was Night at the Opera, and I'd never written a book about Queen. So there were all these things I wanted to do with that. So I pitched and we talked, and they finally agreed. Um, but for Petty, it was a publisher that came to me. And this was part of a series of books they've been putting out. The title is slightly altered. The first I did for them along these lines was Elton John at 75, and then Bruce Springsteen at 75. And so they've altered that a bit. You see, this is Tom Petty, his life in music. It wasn't him at 75, because after that year would pass, then they'd have to change the title. So they knew I had experience in doing these type of books, and it wasn't an idea I would have thought of, but it's always nice to have work come to you, you know. Like I was saying about the Queen book, I have to pitch and convince the publisher, yes, we should do this book for reasons A, B, and C. But when they come to you, they've already agreed to do the book. You don't have to convince them of anything, well, except that you're the one to write it. But in fact, I didn't even have to do that. They say, would you be interested in doing this book on Tom Petty? So I said, yes, as I usually do. This which was it, Binder or Bones Howe? This fellow that worked on Elvis's comeback special and had also produced some of Elvis's records. He said, in show business, you always say yes until you're too busy to say no. And I think that's a good philosophy to live by when one is self-employed.
Yeah, this is true. Yeah. One of my biggest regrets is I'm going to catch Tom Petty on the next tour. And then the next
Oh,
tour didn't happen.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because I was supposed to take my dad to see Tom Petty one year and he got sick that year, so none of us got to go.
Oh,
Well, that's how life rolls sometimes.
yeah. The last time Nirvana played Seattle, they did two shows, and I got into one show. And then I thought later, oh, I should have requested a ticket for both nights. And then I thought, yeah, same thing. I'll see them next time. Queen too, actually. They came to Seattle in '82, and that was for Hot Space, which I wasn't that interested in the album. And I just thought, oh, I'll see them when they come to the US again, because they were touring the US pretty regularly in those days. And then guess what? They never came back.
Yeah, I think we've all learned that just because they're supporting an album you don't care for, go anyway.
Yeah, yeah, because you never know what's going to happen. I mean, certainly in their case, it wasn't due to an untimely death. They just, Hot Space hadn't done very well, so they just didn't come back to the US. Why should they when they were doing well in the rest of the world?
Yeah, there are a lot of bands that seem to do better everywhere else. But of course, America is kind of a finicky market sometimes.
Yeah, well, it's also so big. And I mean, Tom himself had his first chart successes in the UK. I mean, certainly following the steps of a lot of people, like Hendrix, of course, everyone thinks of him, and Blondie, another act like that, that kind of do better over there before coming back to the US. Of course, even talking about that, it's just so different the way the world is now. I'm not quite sure how things work as much. Radio was so important, and I don't think it really has that relevance now. I was actually watching Almost Famous last night, the movie, because I'm reading Cameron Crowe's book, who's in the Petty book as well. Cameron Crowe is kind of like everywhere during that era. But it's certainly one of the best movies about the '70s rock scene and what that was like. You've seen it, I assume.
I have.
Yeah, yeah. Would not be nice to know what Tom thought of that movie. I'm sure he saw it. Uh, Cameron's first film that he directed was a Tom Petty documentary, and he used Tom's music in some of his subsequent movies. And one of the box sets he actually wrote the liner notes for. That is, Cameron Crowe wrote the liner notes for a Petty box set. So
That's pretty fascinating. I did not realize that. I'll have to look that up.
yeah, well, it was in the early '80s, and well, actually, very early. And what was Heartbreakers Beach Party? That was the name of the documentary. And Cameron had been writing about Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers since '78 for Rolling Stone and then other places. So he was hanging out with them. And he ended up working on this documentary. I think I actually saw the directorial credit was shared with three people. And it's kind of jokey. And then it only got screened once, supposedly because there were concerns about the live footage, which had been taken from bootlegs. And, they get tied up with legal issues. Though it was floating around on the collector's circuit, which was how I saw it. And then actually, after I turned the manuscript in, but before the book was published, so I could add something in there, they did revive it, and they had a 1 day screening of it in theaters around the country. I think in some places maybe it was 2 nights. In Seattle, it was just one, so that was your chance to see it on the big screen before it went back into the vaults. Because yeah, there's been nothing about it being released again on a regular streaming or DVD or anything. It
Interesting,
was gem.
that early 80s, I was a wee youngster. So I wouldn't have noticed it anyway because I was too busy being a kid.
Yeah, yeah.
So as you were researching and interviewing people for this book, did you come across anything that surprised you?
Um, I just kind of had a sort of surface knowledge of Tom Petty. So a lot of what I learned was surprising, but it wasn't it wasn't until reading the Warren Zanes biography that I realized how difficult his early years had been, that he had this amazingly abusive father who, would beat him until he grew welts on his body. I mean, that's pretty terrible. And there was one, I forget if this was in the Zane's book or elsewhere. So, he has this horrible father, and he's not doing well in school, though, well, good enough in English and history, though. He was a smart kid. He was just bored with school. And then he's living in Florida, and he's not a hunting and fishing type of guy. So his father's disappointed in that. And then he wears long hair. And it's funny, kids today not realize how much of a big deal the length of someone's hair was back then. Springsteen and his dad also had fights about his hair. And so yeah, Tom had this long hair, those flowing locks that we know and love. But it said in an interview how, because of his long hair and that he didn't bring any girls home, he thought later, that his father thought he might be gay, which he wasn't gay. He just didn't want to bring a girlfriend home to this dysfunctional household.
Can't say that I blame him.
Yeah, yeah, understandably. Um, and then just learning about, say, the various awards he'd won. I mean, you figure, oh yeah, a guy like him, he's won a Grammy, he's in the Rock Hall, but he got the George and Ira Gershwin Award, which was very unusual. They don't really give that to many rock and rollers at all. If he wasn't the first, he was certainly one of the first to get that. So, that was a surprise to learn. And this this wasn't so much a surprise, but just something I thought about a lot. I knew more about Tom because I'm a big Beatles fan. And of course, he worked with the Traveling Wilburys with George Harrison. And so, in reading about him, learning just how seminal a moment that was to see the Beatles on television when they first came to the States, there on February 9th, 1964. Actually, one funny story that I don't know if it was at the bio or some interview he did. He was he was walking around on that Sunday morning, and some kid going by on a bike said, "Hey, the Beatles are on TV tonight." Yeah, yeah, thank you. And I mean, the interesting thing is that he didn't know the kid. It was just this, young kid about his age just thought it was so important to spread the word about the Beatles being on tour, being on TV that night. So I just wonder if he ever reflected back later to being I think he was 13 at the time, watching the Beatles on that night. And then 20 some years later, there he is working with the lead guitarist, George Harrison, the Traveling Wilburys. I mean, if you told the 13-year-old Tom that, he'd have thought you were pulling his leg, no doubt. But yeah, but that must have been, one of those rubbing your eyes moment. Like, what? Oh, and I'm a big Elvis fan too, so I love learning about his connection with Elvis. I didn't know he'd met him, however briefly, but when you think about, yeah, it makes sense because Elvis was making his movie Follow That Dream, set in Florida, and they did some location shooting. And Tom's uncle was on local film crews. That was a side job of his. He ran like a film store, film equipment store. So that's probably how he got into that scene. So he worked on local film shoots. And he says to Tom, "Oh, would you like to meet Elvis?" Okay, sure. Yeah, I'm not doing anything that day. He's like 10. And it wasn't, I guess what's interesting about it was it wasn't just Elvis's music, which that interest came a bit later, but just it gave him an insight as to what showbiz was like because his aunt drives him there with some other kids and they go, get to stand behind the barrier where the VIPs are. And he was just dazzled by all the commotion with the Cadillacs pulling up with his entourage in them. And then Elvis comes out and all the girls are screaming. And then during the film shoot, and it was a very simple scene. It was just Elvis and his co-star pulling up to a bank in their car, their truck, whatever it was. And they get out of the car, they go into the bank. But, and if you've ever been on a film set, even stuff like that takes a while to film. But this one, it took even longer because fans kept breaking through the barricades and, running in and screaming and trying to grab Elvis and ruining the shot. So I could see how that would leave an impression on you. And when he was telling his neighbor that night about about the experience, and he trades his slingshot to his neighbor for a box of 45s, and there's Elvis 45s in there, and so that gets him into Elvis. And years later, he was one of the interviewees in The Searcher. It was a more recent documentary made about Elvis that came out, oh, I don't know, within the last decade or so.
That's
So those
pretty.
kinds of things. Yeah, sorry, but those kind of things are interesting. I guess because I could relate to them too. I mean, a person's life, I think probably any person's life is interesting if you look into it enough. But then if there's something that you can relate to, like his interest in the Beatles or his interest in Elvis, then that's something else that draws you in.
Yeah. Is there anything specific about this book you'd like to bring up that we haven't already talked about?
Um, well, this is the part where that I had nothing to do with, but as usual, they gathered together a really impressive array of images, which, well, I wrote the captions for them, so I suppose I'm involved that way. But people will say to me, "This is such a beautiful book, and the layout, and all these pictures and things. And how did you find them?" And I say, "I did nothing," which is great. I love not having to be involved in the photo research. But I'm told there's, like a lot of rare things in there, not just shots, but there's pictures of memorabilia, like, ticket stubs or backstage passes and stuff. And uh, I know myself, I like seeing that stuff. It's better than just say where you only have pictures of the artist. I like seeing all that fun stuff too. And just the packaging, another thing, you feel it's in a slipcase, so it just seems fancier somehow. And so I'd like people to appreciate that aspect of the book as well.
Yeah, that's very good. The Iron Maiden book had a lot of stuff like that.
Ah,
Concert ticket stubs and stickers and all kinds of drawings. It's really, really neat. And that also came from the same publisher.
yeah, they do a good job with that. I think I
Yeah.
saw that Iron Maiden book, and I'm not really a fan of them, but if I was, I could see how, oh yeah, I'd really love all these pictures.
Well, even not being a fan, just being a music fan in general, looking at that book, because I'm not an Iron Maiden fan, but I found, the layout of the book, the content of the book, other than just what Daniel wrote, it was a very impressive book. So, speaking of impressive books, mention some of the other titles that you've written.
Well, okay, I'll mention some of my favorites. That feature a lot of detailed, in-depth work. And these two are from Jawbone Press. And one is called Return of the King, Elvis Presley's Great Comeback. And the other is Entertain Us, The Rise of Nirvana. And these are both books that look at specific periods in the artist's life. Like the Elvis one, it mainly looks at the comeback period from when he did the comeback special and returned to live performance and recorded in Memphis again after he hadn't for about a decade. And Entertain Us, The Rise of Nirvana, that takes you up to the release of Nevermind. The final chapter covers the release of Nevermind and on, but the bulk of the book is about those earlier years. And I interviewed a lot of firsthand sources in both cases. So, that's interesting to get it, well, straight from the horse's mouth, as
So,
they say.
did you get the opportunity to drum any of the or interview any of the other Nirvana drummers?
Um, yes, let's see. Well, I talked to Aaron before, Aaron Burkhart. I have not talked to Dale Crover or Dave Foster, but I talked a lot to Chad Channing. Uh, of course, he was in the band the longest before Dave joined. Um, the early years of an artist's career are always pretty interesting, I think. Um, and Chad had some interesting words, I thought, to say about his departure, because some say he was fired, and he kind of was, but he sort of engineered that too in a way, which I thought was interesting. This band, they were a very passive aggressive group of people. They weren't good at being upfront with each other or saying, "Oh, this is how I feel." Like with Dave Foster, they never told him he was out of the band. They just started doing shows without him, and he figured it out. But Chad told me, and this is in the book, that when he joined the band, Kurt had said, "Oh yeah, I want to get other musical ideas from you and Chris, and you can be involved in the songwriting." But that didn't really happen because Kurt was just so fixed on his vision. He wanted these songs his way. And certainly the band members could write their own arrangements and all, but really the main ideas came from Kurt. And Chad said as time went on, he became frustrated with that. And he realized, he was not going to have the songwriting role that he hoped to have in the band. And so he said he just began playing kind of less well. He wasn't as involved anymore, so he wasn't as interested in doing as good a job. And the other guys picked up on that, and that's why eventually they came and said to him, "Well, we can't have you in the band anymore." You see, kind of both sides, kind of hedging a bit until the axe dropped. So yeah, I could see why Chad think, no, I wanted to leave. It wasn't that they kicked me out. It's also significant that Kristen and Kurt actually came to Chad to tell him, which they didn't do with any of their other drummers. Even the next one, Dan Peters. Yeah, I talked to him as well. He was just in there for a very short time. And then Kurt and Chris discovered Dave Grohl was available because his band Scream had just fallen apart. And they really liked Dave, and they thought, oh, well, maybe we should try working with him. So they did, and they liked him, and they decided, okay, we want him in the band. But again, they didn't tell Dan right away. They didn't tell Dan Peters right away. Dan said he didn't find out until he called Kurt to talk about this upcoming tour they were doing to the UK. And by then, Kurt had to say something and say, well, yeah, we're kind of working with someone else. So let's see, how many drummers was that? I guess it was three of the drummers I talked to. I've talked to Dave briefly. I talked to him at a longer time after the book came out, and we weren't really talking about Nirvana in that interview. So, but I have interviewed him on other occasions. It was when not the Sound City movie, the one that came out after that, where they recorded the songs in different studios. I can't remember the name. Anyway, one of the songs they recorded was in Shoreline up here, outside of Seattle. The same studio where they recorded Nirvana's last song, actually. And then they were coming to do a show here. They played at the show, and they showed that episode, and so that I interviewed him about that.
Interesting. So tell my audience where they can find you and where they can purchase the books online.
Well, let's see. So I have accounts on, well, I guess it's X now, not Twitter, and Blue Sky, both of them. And I have a Facebook page, Gillian Gaar Writer. And yeah, it's a fan page. You don't need to submit a friend request or anything like that. And as far as getting the books, I mean, you can get them at major retailers like Amazon, but I like to recommend that people go to their favorite local bookstore. If a book is in print, then any good bookstore will know how to order that. So, like in Seattle, I would recommend Elliott Bay Book Company, and in San Francisco, you'd obviously go to Powell's. And a lot of these big bookstores, I mean, they even have websites themselves, so you can order that way. So that's what I recommend.
I've been to Pals in Portland,
Yeah, yeah.
the big one.
Oh, yeah, that's right. They have a smaller one.
Yeah,
I
you can
did a
get
reading
lost
at the
in the big
smaller
one.
one. Yeah, yeah, I haven't been there for a while. It's like 3 stories or something, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's huge.
it is
I've always
huge.
thought at closing time, do they send out special crews to make sure that everyone has left the building?
I, they'd
Because
have to
really,
have a whole
folks,
crew just for that.
yeah, because really, folks, it's big. It's like department store big.
All right, Jillian. Well, I thank you for your time.
No, thank you. It's
You
been
have
a
a great
pleasure.
day.
You too.
Thanks for listening to Big Al's Rockin' Podcast. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe on your preferred podcast outlet. Visit BigAlRocks.com to find past episodes, on-demand links to my radio show, links to my social media, and other Big Al shenanigans. Most importantly, please like and share this episode. Peace out.